The receipt fell from Dean's coat pocket, fluttering to the floor as I emptied his pockets before doing the laundry. I froze, my heart pounding as I read the embossed logo, the Ritz-Carlton, downtown Chicago. A one-night stay for two, charges totaling $647. Dean and I hadn't taken a trip to Chicago in over a year. Not since Tessa's dance recital forced us to cancel our anniversary weekend plans. My hands trembled as I examined the receipt more closely. The date scrawled at the top was just 2 weeks ago. Dean had been in Indianapolis that weekend for a real estate conference, or so he claimed. I searched his coat for more clues, my vision blurring as tears welled up. Tucked in the inner pocket was a crumpled valet ticket from the hotel's parking garage. So he had taken his car there too, removing any doubt about what kind of conference he attended. The click of the front door startled me. I shoved the evidence back into his coat, just as Tessa bounded into the laundry room. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" She glanced at me with those discerning hazel eyes, instantly sensing something was off. Forcing a smile, I pulled her into a hug. "Nothing, honey, just doing some laundry." Tessa hugged me back tightly. My smart, sweet girl, how could I protect her from the truth about her father? "Is Dad's stuff in here?" She bent down to grab his dress shirt from the basket. "I'll take it up to him." "No," I said too forcefully. Tessa's eyes widened in surprise. I mean, I've got it covered. Why don't you start on your homework?" She squinted at me suspiciously, but seemed to decide against pressing further. "Okay, if you're sure." After Tessa left, I collapsed onto the cold tiled floor. Dean's coat clutched against my chest as sobs racked my body. For so long, I had brushed off his late nights at work, his excuses about business trips and client meetings, but this blatant evidence of his betrayal was too much to ignore. How could the man I loved, the father of my child, be so deceitful? We had been together since college, high school sweethearts who emerged from humble beginnings to build what I thought was a wonderful life, 2 thriving careers, a beautiful home in the suburbs, a daughter we adored. Yet for who knew how long, Dean had been lying to us, lying to me. I'm not naive. I knew the strain of raising a family while balancing 2 demanding jobs had created distance between us lately. The spontaneous romance, the date nights, the getaways, those had fallen by the wayside as responsibilities mounted. But I never imagined Dean would give in to temptation and shatter the vows we had made before God. My cheeks burned with humiliation over how blind I had been. The signs were all there if I had just opened my eyes, his evasive demeanor, the nights he claimed to be working late, but I could never reach him on his cell, his sudden interest in dressing sharper and staying more fit. I should have listened to the nagging voice in my gut telling me something was wrong with my life, with my marriage. But it was easier to bury my suspicions, to settle for the thin excuses he offered. Marlene Hart, successful career woman on the surface, but a foolish, ostrich-like failure as a wife. No more, I decided, anger replacing the hurt. I would get to the truth, and if Dean had betrayed our sacred vows, there would be consequences, for him and for the woman he had been unfaithful with. I was done being the last to know about my own life. This unraveling was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I focused on maintaining an air of normalcy around Dean and Tessa, all while covertly gathering more evidence of his infidelity. I logged into the email account linked to his frequent flyer number and discovered bookings for stays in Chicago, Kansas City, and San Francisco during supposed work trips. My manager, Brandon, must have noticed my distracted demeanor at the office. "Everything okay, Marlene? You've seemed a little off lately." I plastered on a polite smile. "Just some family stuff to deal with, but I'm managing." Brandon patted my shoulder consolingly. "Well, let me know if you need any personal days or anything. Family has to come first." If only he knew the truth about my picture-perfect family's sordid situation. I doubted any of my colleagues would be shocked to learn prim proper Marlene Hart was being cheated on by her husband. That night, I decided to finally clear the air with Tessa. If Dean's tangled web continued to unravel, she deserved to know why. I tapped on her bedroom door before entering. "Hey, sweetie, can we chat for a minute?" Tessa looked up from her homework, chewing on the end of her pen. "Sure, what's up?" I settled on the edge of her bed, feeling a pang at how grown-up my little girl had become. At 16, she was nearly a woman herself. "I've been dealing with some issues regarding your father lately, and I think it's time I filled you in." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't seem entirely surprised. "Okay. The other day I found evidence that seems to suggest he may have been unfaithful to me, to us." Tessa was quiet for a long moment, before finally speaking. "You know, I overheard something at Dad's office a couple weeks ago. Maybe it's related?" My heart skipped a beat. "What did you hear?" "I was waiting for Dad to finish up a meeting so we could go to dinner. His colleague Ronnie came into his office and started laughing about how Dad had a sweet exotic thing on the side. Then he said they were going to hit the Ritz this weekend for some special treatment with a couple of girls." White-hot rage surged through me at Ronnie's vulgar words, at the thought of Dean with some sleazy prostitute at that hotel. But I maintained an even tone. For Tessa's sake. "I see. Well, that certainly aligns with what I discovered." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "So it's true? Dad's been cheating?" I pulled my daughter into a fierce hug, determined to stay strong for her, even as my own heart broke into pieces. "Unfortunately, all evidence suggests that's the case. I am so sorry, sweetheart. You didn't deserve to have this happen to our family." Tessa sniffed against my shoulder. "But why, Mom? Why would he do this to us after everything you've sacrificed for him and his career?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Why do men who seem to have it all still throw away their family's love and trust for cheap thrills? I stroked Tessa's hair soothingly. "I don't have an answer, baby girl. But what I do know is that we can get through this together. We're going to be just fine." I meant the words as a reassuring promise. At the same time, they came out sounding like a vow to uncover every sordid detail of Dean's betrayal. And to make him pay dearly for the anguish he had inflicted on the two people who loved him most. After confiding in Tessa about Dean's betrayal, I felt a renewed sense of determination. My daughter and I were now a united front. We would weather this storm together and make sure her father faced the consequences he deserved. The next morning, I feigned a stomach bug and called into work, using the free time to take my investigation into high gear. While Tessa was at school, I dug through Dean's home office, my fury mounting with each new discovery. Credit card statements detailed thousands of dollars in unexplained expenditures, lavish meals, pricey hotel suites, even some unseemly charges from online flower delivery services. So he had been wining and dining his mistress in addition to bedding her. How cliché. I found an electronic treasure trove when I accessed Dean's laptop and recovered deleted emails and documents. There were incriminating messages back and forth with his coworker and supposed wingman Ronnie, crowing about their extramarital dalliances. But even more disturbing were the files that appeared to outline an elaborate real estate Ponzi scheme Dean was involved with. They detailed how he and a network of shady developers and bankers had been systemically overinflating the value of commercial properties through falsified appraisals and sales records. It was fraud on a massive scale, netting the conspirators millions in ill-gotten profits. This went so far beyond mere infidelity. My husband, the man I had supported wholeheartedly in building his career, was quite literally a criminal. I felt sickened by his deception and greed. He had risked destroying our family over his insatiable lust for money and sexual gratification. As if his moral failings weren't enough, Dean's reckless behavior had now put our financial security at risk. He was going to pay, in more ways than one. When Tessa got home from school, we strategized about our next steps. To her credit, she stayed admirably focused and determined, clearly inheriting my pragmatic nature rather than getting bogged down by melodrama. "Well, we can't let Dad know we're onto him yet," she said matter-of-factly. "Not until we have an airtight case built against him." I nodded in agreement. "Precisely. I want to gather enough evidence that he can't obfuscate or slither his way out of taking responsibility." Tessa tapped away at her laptop keyboard. "I was thinking I could try hacking into Dad's email and messaging apps. See if I can recover more of his communications." "You know how to do that?" I couldn't help but raise an impressed eyebrow. She shrugged modestly. "I may or may not have gotten pretty savvy at cracking codes and bypassing firewalls. My teenage daughter, the secret hacker vigilante. I really shouldn't have been that surprised, given her incredible intellect and preternatural maturity." "Okay, you work on that," I said. "Meanwhile, I'm going to consult with a lawyer about protecting our assets and rights as this gets uglier. Tessa nodded grimly. We both knew there was no going back now. Dean's actions had shattered the family he professed to cherish so much. Now we were in scorched earth mode, poised to bring him down in appropriately epic fashion. I thought back to the day Dean and I had met at that frat party in college. The cheesy pickup line he had used, his warm smile, the certainty I had felt even then that he was the one. Our relationship had seemed blessed from the start, like we were destined to build a perfect life and future together. In that moment, I realized the man I thought I knew so well was a mythological creature, a mirage that had obscured the true Dean, a selfish, deceitful husband and criminal who was about to learn the harsh price of betraying his family. The next morning, I put on my most confident suit and headed downtown to meet with Ella James, one of the top family law attorneys in Chicago. As I waited in her pristine office adorned with accolades and Ivy League diplomas, I tried to shake the nagging feeling of dread over what I was about to set in motion. Ella swept in, all poise and polish, offering a warm smile. Marlene, thanks for coming in. I must say, your situation is quite complicated. I nodded soberly. You could say that, but I need to protect myself and my daughter, no matter how messy things get. Laying out the sordid facts about Dean's affairs and criminal activities, I watched as Ella's expression morphed from empathetic to disturbed. I'm so sorry you've had to endure this nightmare, Marlene, but you did the right thing by gathering evidence. She shook her head. Both the infidelity and this real estate scheme, either one would be grounds for divorce and potentially criminal charges. My stomach twisted at those words, despite knowing this was inevitable. No matter how much Dean had betrayed me, I still remembered our happier times together, still loved the man he used to be, at least. So what are my options? I asked hoarsely. Ella laid out a series of legal strategies, protecting my assets, securing full custody of Tessa, and pursuing criminal charges against Dean and his co-conspirators. By the time I left her office, I had a clear roadmap, even if the path ahead looked daunting. When I arrived home, Tessa was waiting anxiously. One look at my face, and she knew the situation was as dire as we feared. I take it the lawyer laid it all out? She asked quietly. I simply nodded, surprising myself by managing to stay composed. We're going to hit Dean with everything we've got. Divorce, seizing his assets, maybe even criminal charges, depending on how deep this fraud goes. Tessa's eyes widened slightly, but she seemed resolute rather than scared. Well, I did what I could to help build the case. She turned her laptop to show me a series of recovered emails and text messages between Dean and Ronnie, each one more damning than the last. There were explicit details about their trysts with various mistresses and escorts. But even more concerning were their boasts about tricking banks and regulators, laundering money through shell companies, and scamming property owners out of millions in illegally inflated sale prices. I also found some cryptic audio recordings that sound like blackmail discussions, Tessa added grimly. This goes far beyond what we even knew. I shook my head in numb disbelief, having to remind myself that this wasn't tawdry cable movie plot. It was the harsh reality of how my life had unraveled, of the truth about the man I had built a family and future with. Dean has some serious skeletons in his closet, I murmured, and we're going to unleash every last one of them. A few days later, Dean headed out of town again on another alleged work trip. As soon as he was gone, I changed all the locks and passcodes, boxing up what few possessions of his remained untainted by his misdeeds. It was a definitive, if small, first step towards reclaiming my home and life. When he inevitably returned to hostile territory, Dean would learn just how steep a price he was going to pay. There would be no more looking the other way, no more benefit of the doubt. He had gambled everything by indulging his greed and lust. Now it was time to double down and take him for everything he was worth. Dean swaggered through the front door a week later, rolling his suitcase behind him with his usual breezy demeanor, but his expression quickly shifted to one of confusion when he noticed the changes. Marlene? Why does the security code not work, and where is all my stuff? I entered from the kitchen, Tessa at my side, arms folded across our chests in a united front. Dean's eyes widened as he took in our grim demeanors. What's going on here? He asked warily. Rather than answering, I pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it on the foyer table in front of him. "Open it," I said flatly. He shot me a questioning look, but seemed to sense this wasn't a situation to argue. Sliding the envelope's contents out, his face drained of color as he thumbed through the stack of documents. Copies of all the credit card statements, emails, recordings, and financial records exposing his tangled web of affairs and fraud. "How? Where did you get all this?" he sputtered, looking between Tessa and I desperately. Tessa stepped forward, surprising me with the steel in her tone. "Does it really matter, Dad? We know everything about your mistresses, your illegal deals, all the money you stole through those real estate scams. It's all right here in black and white." Dean seemed to deflate, dropping the document pile as if it had burned him. He opened his mouth, presumably to offer one of his familiar lies and justifications, but I cut him off sharply. "Don't even try denying it, Dean. We have proof of all your sordid activities, the affairs, the Ponzi scheming, the bank fraud, and money laundering. It's the full truth without any more excuses to hide behind." He worked his jaw, seemingly at a loss before his features contorted into an ugly sneer. "Oh, like you're so innocent in all this, Marlene? Always burying yourself in work, never making time for me anymore." I couldn't believe the audacity of him trying to blame Schiff to me. That's no excuse for screwing around with other women and breaking my trust, not to mention potentially ruining us financially with your greed. I shook my head in disgust. Anything to save face and avoid taking responsibility, right, Dean? You smug, self-righteous... Don't talk to my mom like that. Tessa's voice rang out, startling us both. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, but her body was taut with fury. "After everything she sacrificed for this family while you threw it all away?" Dean opened his mouth again, but seemed to think better of it. The damning evidence must have finally silenced his delusional bravado. He simply stood there, jaw clenched, unable to meet our furious gazes. "Get out," I said, surprising myself with how cold and hard my voice sounded. "Take your shot and get out! This marriage is over." When he didn't immediately move, Tessa stepped forward and grabbed the box containing his belongings, shoving it against his chest roughly. "You heard her. Get the fuck out of our house before I call the cops and tell them everything." That seemed to snap Dean out of his stupor. He grabbed the box and his suitcase, shoulders slumped in what I could only assume was a mixture of shame and anger. As he trudged out the door, he paused, turning back with an unreadable expression. "You'll regret this," he muttered darkly. "We had it all, and you threw it away over some..." "Some what?" I cut him off, quirking an eyebrow imperiously. "Some audacious lies and criminal behavior that you thought I'd just accept? Good fucking luck with that." I slammed the door in his face, a cavalcade of emotions crashing over me, rage, sorrow, but most of all, a sense of release. The shackles of Dean's treachery had been unlocked, the first weight lifted from my shoulders. When I turned back to Tessa, she was smiling through her tears. "We really showed that douchebag, huh?" Despite everything, I laughed and pulled her into a tight hug. "That we did, kiddo. That was just the first salvo." We had laid the first bricks on the path to making Dean pay for his unforgivable sins, and there was no turning back now. In the aftermath of kicking Dean out, I naively thought the hardest part was behind us. How wrong I was. Over the next few weeks, the full weight of his betrayal and our paths to revenge came crashing down. First, there were the vicious legal battles as Dean fought me tooth and nail over custody of Tessa and our assets. Ella was a lioness, ruthlessly burying him under the mountain of evidence we had amassed. Still, the prospect of airing our family's ugly laundry in court made my skin crawl. Then Dean's Ponzi scheme unraveled spectacularly, drawing in law enforcement. One morning, there was a firm rap on the door. Federal agents with a warrant to search our home as part of their fraud investigation into Dean and his cohorts. Seeing my life picked apart before their unfeeling eyes will be seared into my memory forever. As if that indignity wasn't enough, reporters soon descended en masse. Lurid stories detailing Dean's affairs and crooked business dealings splashed across the front pages and gossip websites. For Tessa's sake, I tried keeping her sheltered from the worst of it, but she was far too perceptive to be fully shielded. One night I arrived home from a grueling day at the office to find her on the living room couch, laptop open and earbuds in. She jumped guiltily when I entered. "Hey, Mom, I was just, I raised my eyebrows. "Let me guess, reading more of those articles again?" She bit her lip, eyes down. Her face said it all. "I can't help it," she muttered miserably. "All the stuff they're writing about Dad, about you." She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. My stomach twisted. I knew exactly which articles she meant. The ones salaciously detailing Dean's trysts with various mistresses and call girls. The ones scrutinizing my neglect of my wifely duties as a high-powered career woman. The ones questioning whether I had turned a blind eye to obvious signs of trouble in our marriage. I settled onto the couch beside Tessa, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I know it's brutal, sweetheart. Believe me, what those vultures write doesn't capture even a fraction of how blindsided and betrayed I felt by your father's actions." She looked up at me with those big, soulful eyes that had inherited both Dean and I's colors. "But why, Mom? Why did he throw it all away like this? I keep reading those articles, trying to find some shred of an explanation, but it just gets more and more confusing and messed up." I chewed my lip, trying to find words to sum up the kaleidoscopic mess of emotions I still grappled with over Dean's implosion. The truth is, I'm not sure we'll ever understand his motives fully. Whether it was boredom, entitlement, or simple moral depravity, he made the choice to discard the family he claimed to cherish above all else. Saying it aloud reopened those wounds of rejection and humiliation from his affairs. But I pushed through, needing Tessa to understand the cold, hard truths about her father. What I do know is this: his actions were utterly selfish and unforgivable. Any attempts at justification are just sad excuses to avoid accountability. I cupped her cheek tenderly, feeling my heart splinter further at her wounded expression. "What your dad did was on him, baby girl, not us. We did nothing to invite this pain and public mockery into our lives beyond loving him unconditionally." Tessa nodded, wiping away the tears that had escaped down her cheeks. "I know, and to be honest, as much as it sucks to read all that horrible stuff, it just makes me angrier at him, for hurting you and tainting what our family was." Her jaw set in a determined line that reminded me so much of myself. "He's going to pay for that, Mom. We're going to make sure of it." I matched her fiery gaze and felt that all-too-familiar burning for vengeance reignite in the pit of my stomach. Damn straight we are. Dean Hart could temporarily avoid consequences by hiding behind his hotshot lawyers and privilege. But we would make sure that sheltered deniability was only temporary. The fallout was just beginning, for him and everyone unlucky enough to be caught in the blast radius of his selfish rampage. I was done being the victim. It was time to become the avenger. With Ella's tenacious representation, my mounting legal proceedings against Dean proceeded full steam ahead despite his attempts at stalling and obfuscating. Each court victory, no matter how small, filled me with a sense of resolute satisfaction. First, the judge awarded me full custody of Tessa, citing the mountain of evidence detailing Dean's moral failings as a father. He tried playing up his usual charming bravado on the stand, but the damning communication records and money trails couldn't be disputed. When the order was read, I had to keep myself from smirking at the flicker of desperation on Dean's face. He had severely underestimated just how far I was willing to go once his web of lies and betrayal became known. Next came the assets and property division, another lopsided outcome in my favor. Between the legal bills for his fraud case and the court judgments freezing his assets, Dean found his high-flying lifestyle as a commercial real estate broker ground to a humiliating halt. "Go ahead and appeal, you arrogant prick," Ella said with a vindicated grin after another hearing. "More delays just mean more legal fees bleeding you dry." Throughout it all, Tessa was my unwavering rock, even when I felt petty doubts creeping in over the scorched earth path we had set ourselves on. Seeing my brave girl grappling with the collateral damage of having her family blown apart was a constant punch to the gut. "It'll all be worth it when he gets what he deserves, Mom," she assured me one night over dinner, squeezing my hand tightly. "We can't let his disgusting lies and crimes just be forgiven." I marveled at her wisdom and perspective, far beyond her 16 years. She had seen firsthand the devastation caused by turning a blind eye to Dean's misdeeds. Tessa knew the only path forward was the painful but necessary one of holding him accountable. And make no mistake, he was being held accountable like never before. The legal assault I had unleashed on Dean spread like a virus, infecting every aspect of his once thriving existence. Just a few months after I had kicked him out, his luxury home was foreclosed and auctioned off. His prized Mercedes and country club memberships were seized and liquidated to pay the sprawling legal fees and court judgments against him. Before long, he was squatting in some seedy motel, adrift without his family's love and the material trappings he had so valued. We relished every salacious news report detailing his downward spiral, from the dismissal of his bogus lawsuits trying to claw back assets to the stripping of his real estate broker's license. Having spent so many years blinded by his lies, there was a grim satisfaction in watching Dean's shiny facade get stripped away piece by piece until the ugly truth was all that remained. The coup de grace was when the Department of Justice finally handed down indictments against him and his band of co-conspirator brokers, bankers, and property developers. Over 24 charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and more. Potential penalties ranging into the millions of dollars in fines and decades of prison time if convicted. "About damn time," Tessa said through gritted teeth when we received the news, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the arms of her chair. I simply nodded, unable to speak around the tight lump of emotions clogging my throat. There was undoubtedly a twisted sense of victory in seeing Dean's unscrupulous business dealings and moral depravity laid bare for all to see. But there were no cheers or celebrations, just a hollow relief at reaching this point. Because no amount of ruined reputations or draconian sentences could undo the permanent damage wrought by my husband's lies and betrayal. The innocence of the Hart family I had believed in for so long was gone forever, a distant memory eroded by harsh realities. We had risen from the ashes of Dean's selfishness, emboldened in a way that only true trauma could forge. But that tenacious resolve came with the heavy burden of accepting how ugly and unfair life could truly be. As the storm clouds of his legal jeopardy closed in, I couldn't help but feel pangs of the love I had once nurtured for the flawed man at the center of this destruction. Not the criminal he had become, but the imperfect person I had trusted, the father of my child, the dreamer who had once aspired to so much more than greed and lust. But those frail embers of affection and nostalgia were stamped out by the gale winds of his ultimate betrayal. Dean Hart had gambled away his family's devotion in pursuit of insatiable vices, and now he would be forced to pay that shattering debt in full, no matter how spiritually it bankrupted him. The day of Dean's sentencing hearing was crisp and quiet, the kind of early fall morning that would have once inspired our family to take a drive and admire the changing leaves. But those idyllic memories now felt like entries from someone else's life. Tessa and I arrived at the courthouse hand in hand, our mutual solidarity fortifying us for this final chapter in our quest to hold Dean accountable. A gaggle of reporters shoved microphones and cameras in our faces as we entered, hungry for any reaction shots or quotable sound bites. But we pushed through in stony silence, Ella's capable assistant clearing our path. Inside the hushed courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy, part solemn ceremony, part circus sideshow for the rubberneckers baying for blood. I scanned the crowd for Dean, but he was already seated at the defense table, shoulders slumped in wrinkled shirt sleeves as he conferred with his lawyers. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something akin to pity as I studied him. The dark circles under his eyes, the thinness of his cheeks, the unkempt hair. This man was a mere shadow of the confident, affluent husband I had once loved and admired. The consequences I had vowed to make him face had undoubtedly extracted their punishing toll. But that wisp of empathy was quickly extinguished as images of his misdeeds flashed in my mind. The lies, the affairs, the intricate fraud schemes that had infected every aspect of our lives. Dean's selfish choices had lit the fuse on this explosion, not me. I was simply the shrapnel-scarred survivor demanding justice be served, no matter how charred the process left us all. The hearing itself was a mercifully stayed, by-the-numbers affair of legal choreography. Dean entered his plea, a procedural recitation of charges was read aloud, victim impact statements were offered. When it was my turn on the stand, I kept my words clipped and concise as instructed by Ella, letting the incontrovertible evidence speak for itself. Dean Hart's actions shattered the sacred vows and trust that held our family together. While he indulged in ego, affairs, and criminal greed, he robbed our daughter and myself of our sense of security and identity as a loving household. I paused, keeping my voice controlled despite the grief that still lingered in that admission. His punishment must be severe, precisely because of who he betrayed, the two people in this world who deserved his full loyalty and devotion above all else. Tessa's hand found mine and squeezed tightly in a quiet gesture of gratitude and support. The judge, a wizened woman insulated by decades on the bench, sat inscrutably as she took in the weighty accounts. In the end, she wasted no words in rendering her decision, methodically walking through the litany of convictions. Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, criminal conspiracy, an avalanche of fines, penalties, and prison sentences that would bury Dean in a tomb of concrete and steel for the better part of the next 2 decades. Rather than reacting with exultant cheers, the courtroom seemed to exhale a collective sigh of muted finality at the ruling. It was the proper outcome after all, an unshakable precedent upheld and poison expelled from the community to restore order. Still, as the bailiffs led Dean away in handcuffs, he managed to twist around, zeroing in on Tessa and I with eyes brimming with bitter venom. "I hope your revenge leaves you both stronger than this betrayal left me," he spat out, voice dripping with resentment and barely suppressed rage. His desperate attempt at regaining some sense of moral high ground was so ludicrously pathetic, I felt a distant pity welling up again. Because unlike Dean, Tessa and I would not be reduced to a broken, hollow shell of our former selves. We were battered, yes, but not destroyed by the sprawling wreckage trailing his passing like a toxic spill. As he disappeared through the courtroom door, I rose and slowly made my way over to Tessa, wrapping her in a tight embrace. With the proceedings concluded and judgment rendered, our family's quest for catharsis from Dean's transgressions was now complete. No more courtrooms or lawyer meetings or depositions scrutinizing every sordid detail of where things went so irrevocably wrong. We had risen from the ashes of Dean's betrayal, now free to begin shaping our own path forward, unburdened by his lies and untethered to the poisoned roots of our past. "It's over," Tessa murmured softly as we stood there holding each other amidst the dispersing crowd. "We survived." I pressed my lips against the top of her head, relishing her strength and the promise of a future she could author without the stain of her father's legacy. "That we did, baby. It's just you and me now, but we're going to be just fine. Because no matter how deep the scars, a love that withstands such cataclysmic levels of betrayal becomes forged into something wholly tempered and unbreakable."
I lay sprawled on the cold kitchen floor and gripped my stomach, a searing pain shooting through me like a twisted knife. Catherine, my small daughter, was standing close by, a terrified expression on her face. "Mommy, are you okay?" she said nervously. I tried to sound cool in spite of the excruciating agony. "I'll be all right, my love." I pretended that my stomach discomfort was nothing more than a nasty one, trying to hide from her how serious my illness was. Footsteps sounded closer. Willie, my husband, emerged at the doorway, his features more befitting of irritation than worry. With his luggage and towel, he was ready for his excursion. "Amy, what's going on?" His tone was more annoyed than scared as he said, "Why are you on the floor?" "Willie, I believe you have appendicitis. It's quite serious. We must see the hospital," I whispered, my voice heady with suffering. He gave a contemptuous scowl. "What is appendicitis?" "Most likely, you're just exaggerating." "Most likely, it's just acid reflux." I tried to protest, but I was silenced by a searing agony. With evident impatience, Willie took a quick look at his watch. "I can't let Carol down on this trip." "Simply hail a cab, or something," he offered, dismissively waving. As I attempted to talk once more, my surprise at his lack of empathy increased. "Willie, I'm so immobile. Here is Catherine," I begged, my voice husky with desperation. "I need you." Unfazed, he shook his head. "Most likely, it's nothing. Make a call if things worsen." He then walked away, leaving his baggage in his wake. With Catherine by my side, I lay there in excruciating anguish. Tears filled her eyes as her tiny hands met mine. "Don't be sick, Mommy. You must be all right," she cried. I gathered what strength I had left and drew her in. "Darling, I'm here. Mom is present." I had a sense of urgency once Willie left. I shook my hands and grabbed my phone to call my brother Russell, the only person I knew would be there. The kitchen's quiet was broken by the sound of a phone call. "Hello." Russell radiated hope with his voice. "This is Amy." "Russell, I require assistance. It appears to be appendicitis. I'm immobile." With terror evident in her grip, Catherine clung to me as I blurted out the words, each one a struggle against the anguish. I managed to get through. "Catherine is scared," my voice cracking. There was a pause before Russell's soothing, serene voice answered the phone. "Amy, I'm on my way. Keep your grip tight. I will be there shortly." I closed my eyes as I lay there on the chilly tile floor, attempting to ignore the searing pain that was shooting through me. Amid the turmoil, Catherine remained near, her meager presence providing a small sense of consolation. Something determined began to grow within me at that very instant. Not only was Willie's neglect during this crucial period unpleasant, but it also represented a deep betrayal and a turning point in our relationship. One thing was certain while I waited for Russell to arrive. Things had to change. Later, in the hospital bed, with the clean walls and the monotonous beeping of machinery all around me, I felt a peaceful calmness. My swollen appendix was successfully removed during surgery, but Willie's mental damage persisted. To take care of Catherine while I recovered, I had given my parents a call. Their queries regarding Willie's absence hung heavy in the air, and their voices were full of concern. I was back at home 2 days later. Now the physical pain was only a dull ache, a lingering reminder of what had happened. The good news was that Catherine seemed happy to see me again. "You're back, Mom." Her simple query, "Are you all better now?" made my heart sing. I hugged her tightly and said, "I'm getting there, sweetie," appreciating her consoling presence. But the thunderous smash of the main door the following day abruptly cut short our quiet reunion. Experiencing agitation in their voices, Willie and his sister, Carol, suddenly interrupted. "Why did you not come get us yesterday?" The cost of our train and cab trips had increased. As he went into the living room, the room was filled with Willie's accusing tone. I felt a wave of rage rising up inside me at his foolishness. "Good to see you again. It must have been quite the trek." I met his gaze and spoke icily. Willie paused, surprised at my cold reception. The obvious tension seemed to stun even Carol. "What's with the attitude, Amy?" Willie made a demand. I was at my breaking point. "I was in the hospital while you were enjoying your trip," I said, frowning at Willie and his sister Carol, whose demands frequently caused him to neglect his family obligations. Willie was truly perplexed, and Carol's cheeks flushed. "What topic are you discussing?" "You're all right, then?" he questioned scornfully. "Willie, it's not just about getting by. It's about being there for your family when they need you," I shot back, losing no more patience. Before Willie could reply, the door flew open and our parents and Will's parents, together with Russell, were staring at Willie and Carol with a mixture of disappointment and rage in their eyes. "Why is everyone here?" Willie said, his voice quivering. His normal assurance wavered in the face of their intensive scrutiny. I took a big breath and forced myself to express how wounded and betrayed I felt. "When Catherine and I most needed you, Willie, you abandoned us. You weren't there when I was in the hospital," I told our relatives. Willie appeared to become smaller, losing his usual bluster. His gaze darted about in search of an ally, but it was not to be found. "Willie, it goes beyond this particular occurrence. It concerns all the instances in which you have prioritized Carol over your own family," Russell added, sounding a great deal of disappointment. Normally self-assured, Carol now seemed uncomfortable, her gaze flickering between the floor and the distressed looks all around her. Tension permeated the room as Willie attempted to explain himself by fumbling for explanations and rationalizations. This was a pivotal time for me. I came to the realization that Willie's negligence could no longer define my life. It was time to make a shift, time to defend Catherine, and stand up for myself. Though the meeting came to an unresolved finish, I saw it as the start of a new chapter in which I would no longer put up with being ignored. The events of the day left no doubt about their meaning. Our families were all in favor of me, and Willie's apathetic attitude had clearly broken down as they were leaving. Willie's parents gave me pitying glances, a tacit acknowledgement of their son's flaws. The conflicts of the day replayed in my head as I lay in bed that night, causing a flurry of feelings to swirl around me, including rage, disappointment, and a growing sense of empowerment. It was obvious that Willie's true colors had shown through, and I had to take responsibility for my own life. The days that followed were tense, filled with unspoken words and strained silences. Willie attempted to maintain normalcy, but the air between us was thick with tension. During this time, I took to reflecting on my deep-seated unhappiness and the undeniable need for change. The decision I was leaning towards wasn't easy, but it felt essential, like finally breathing freely after being suffocated for too long. One evening, as Willie nonchalantly flipped through TV channels, I approached him with a folder in hand, my heart pounding but my resolve steadfast. "Willie, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He looked up, irritation crossing his features. "What now, Amy?" Taking a deep breath, I handed him the folder. "I want a divorce," I declared. Willie stared at me, a mix of disbelief and scorn etched across his face. "Divorce? That's absurd, Amy. You're blowing things out of proportion," he retorted. I shook my head, feeling a surge of empowerment wash over me. "It's not an exaggeration. I've thought long and hard about this. You consistently prioritized Carol over me and Catherine. I can't continue like this." Willie sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you can manage alone? Don't be naive, Amy." His words were intended to wound, but I stood my ground. "I'm not naive, Willie. I understand what this means, but I'd rather face uncertainty than continue feeling invisible in my marriage." He laughed coldly, a bitter sound that echoed in the tense air. "Good luck, Amy. You'll regret this once you realize how tough it is out there." His dismissal fueled my resolve. I felt my anger rise, not just at his words, but at the years of being sidelined. This moment, though fraught with challenges, marked a new beginning for me, a step toward reclaiming my life and my worth. Maintaining my composure, I firmly declared, "This is my decision, and I'm sticking to it." For a moment, it seemed Willie might argue further, but instead, he just shrugged, a smug smirk spreading across his face. "Fine, have it your way. But remember I warned you," he said dismissively as he turned back to the TV, ignoring me once again. Amidst a whirlwind of emotions, fear was undoubtedly present, but more overpowering was the sense of liberation I felt. I was finally taking charge of my life, stepping out from the shadows. The next day, I began the legal process for divorce. The paperwork and legal procedures were daunting, but my resolve was firm. My parents and my brother, Russell, provided invaluable support, offering help and encouragement. As the process unfolded, Willie's true nature became increasingly apparent. He was dismissive and uncooperative, attempting to intimidate me into giving up. But I stood my ground, bolstered by my family's support and a growing sense of empowerment. As time passed, the crack in Willie's facade widened. The charming, confident man I had married. Now he has revealed himself to be selfish and manipulative. His true self was laid bare for all to see. The divorce proceedings were arduous, but I approached each challenge with bravery. Each step forward was a testament to my newfound determination. I was no longer the woman who lay ignored and in pain on the kitchen floor. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my happiness. The divorce process was exhausting, punctuated by Willie's continual attempts to undermine and belittle me. In our meetings, he would sneer and make derogatory remarks about my parenting and my future without him. However, his words did not defeat me. Instead, they fueled my determination to free myself from his toxic influence. "Enjoy your struggles, Amy," Willie taunted during one of our final meetings. "You'll soon see how good you had it with me." His arrogance was infuriating, but I remained composed. I'd rather face challenges every day than spend another moment with someone who has so little regard for his family. I replied firmly, and Willie's smug demeanor briefly faltered, replaced by a flicker of anger, which he quickly masked with a scoff. My resolve was clear. I was moving forward, no longer tethered by his disdain. I could feel that my words had struck a nerve. On the day the divorce was finalized, I experienced a peculiar mix of relief and anxiety. I was finally free from Willie, but the path ahead looked formidable. However, as I stepped out of the courthouse, a surge of liberation swept through me, revitalizing my spirit. In the weeks that followed, Willie's life began to unravel. His neglectful behavior during our marriage and the news of our separation became hot topics among his workplace peers. Those who had once admired him now looked at him with a mix of pity and disdain. His charming facade had crumbled, revealing the pettiness and selfishness that lay beneath. The news of our divorce spread quickly through our community, thanks in part to my well-connected cousin. Willie, who had always been deeply concerned about his image and reputation, suddenly found himself the subject of whispered conversations and judgmental glances. Carol, too, was not spared from scrutiny. Her involvement in our marital issues became widely known, and friends and neighbors started to view her with suspicion and disapproval. The once solid bond she shared with Willie now appeared strained and uncomfortable. One evening, as I picked up Catherine from school, I overheard a heated argument between Willie and Carol outside their house. Their voices were laden with blame and resentment. "It's your fault we're in this mess," Carol shouted. "How dare you blame me? You're the one who couldn't keep your family together," Willie retorted, his voice thick with anger. Their public quarrel was a stark contrast to the united front they once displayed. The discord shown by their actions had finally borne fruit, and now they were dealing with the consequences. As I walked away with Catherine, a sense of vindication washed over me. Willie and Carol were now experiencing the fallout of their selfish choices. It was a harsh lesson, but one that seemed justly earned. The challenges they faced were entirely of their own making. That night, as Catherine slept peacefully in her room, I found myself by the window, reflecting on the tumultuous past few months. The journey had been arduous, yet it led me to a place of strength and self-respect. I had stood up for my dignity and Catherine's future. Though the road ahead was uncertain, I felt equipped to face it with newfound confidence. In the wake of the divorce, life began to settle into a new, quieter, yet more fulfilling rhythm. The burden of my unhappy marriage had been lifted, giving way to a refreshing sense of independence. With Catherine by my side, I started the process of reconstructing my life piece by piece. My main goal was to get a job. I was concerned about the gap in my CV from the years I spent being a mother, but I was adamant about not giving up. I eventually secured a job at a small accounting business following multiple interviews. The company offered a flexible and understanding work environment, and its supportive leadership supported working mothers. For me, it was the ideal fit. With the forbearance that only a kid can exhibit, Catherine also adjusted to our new lifestyle. As she started kindergarten, she made new friends and threw herself wholeheartedly into her academics. Unlike the harsh atmosphere of the past, her laughing and lively talks brought joy and light into our home. Even with these good developments, memories of my time spent with Willie would periodically reappear. As I was leaving Catherine off at school one afternoon, I noticed some parents speaking to each other. "Amy, that's who she is," one of them said. Her husband left her because he couldn't stand being around her anymore. Even though their remarks hurt, I kept my head up. The judgment and rumors were little costs for the independence and tranquility I was now able to experience. In the meantime, Willie's life was becoming worse. His reputation, which had been spotless before, had become obviously damaged, and his pride took a serious hit. He was trying very hard to hide the fact that he had moved back in with his parents, as I found out through common connections. Despite a few sad recollections, this new chapter in my life was largely a testament to my perseverance and the better future Catherine and I had ahead of us. After a while, everyone found out that Willie had moved back home with his parents, nor had Carol's circumstances improved. Her interfering in our marriage had caused rifts with many of her friends, and her relationship with Willie had taken a serious hit. Their relationship was plagued by guilt and sorrow, and they hardly communicated at all. In my case, I took solace in my family's unwavering support. Russell, my brother, had moved in closer, and he was a regular source of support and comfort. Catherine was showered with love and care from my parents, which helped to mend the wounds from the past. I thought back on my trip, the suffering, the struggle, and finally the release. One day, as I was sipping coffee quietly in my kitchen, everything had brought me to this peaceful moment. Not only had I survived, but I had also come out stronger and more confident. The doorbell disturbed my reverie. I discovered Willie standing there with a defeated expression on his face when I opened the door. "I apologize, Amy." With regret in his voice, he remarked, "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." Even though it was late, his apologies confirmed my choice. I softly said, "Thank you, Willie, but it's too late. I've moved on." I felt a deep sense of closure as I shut the door on Willie and the life we had shared. I'd closed that chapter of my life and was starting a new one. I was the creator of my own story in this new chapter, and I could mold my destiny any way I pleased. A grin appeared on my face when Catherine's voice came from the living room. I approached her, excited to welcome the life that awaited me. a life full of opportunities and promise. I'm Polly, and I was my mother's firstborn. I was born into a woman who was still figuring herself out. She married my dad, Scott, young, shortly after graduating from high school. Their primary concern was love, rather than money, which didn't last long. When she met Kyle, a wealthy guy with a gorgeous car, I was still a young child. With the exception of picking up the alimony checks, she never looked back after taking me and leaving my dad. Kyle appeared kind at first. He would play with me in his large, glossy office while bringing me little gifts. But my mother moved away from him. She constantly gave me the look that said I brought up memories of a life she wished to forget. One evening, I was supposed to be watching TV when I heard them conversing in the kitchen. "She resembles Scott too much," my mother remarked angrily. "Always asking questions, always looking at me like he used to." It ached to hear her talk about me as though I was a problem, even though at the time I didn't comprehend what she meant. I cherished my biological father, even though he lived in a tiny apartment across the city. Spending time with him was always enjoyable, even if we were just playing in the park or getting takeout pizza. That night, my mother said something that really resonated with me, and over time, she just grew more critical. Whenever I attempted to assist her around the house or completed my homework in the living room, she would ask, "Can't you do anything right?" In contrast, my dad was not like that. He would always say, "You're doing great, Polly," whether I showed him my grades or her school drawing. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." When I started school, things at my mom and Kyle's house became more tense. My mother was constantly stressing about how important it was for me to look good, dress nicely, and hang out with the correct kids. "Why are you unable to dress like the daughter of Karen?" she would say. Look at her, and show me a photo from a gathering to which I was not invited. I finally lost it one day after Mother reprimanded me for dragging muck into the hallway. At least Dad doesn't yell about a bit of dirt. Before I knew it, her hand was burning my cheek with a slap. Her face was near to mine, her breath smelling of coffee and rage. "Don't talk about your father like that," she whispered. My eyes began to well up with tears, but I controlled them as my father had taught me to do. I made a pact to myself that night as I lay in bed that I wouldn't let her see me cry. I wouldn't satisfy her in that way. The whole house felt different when Mom said she was pregnant again, as if a major, unfavorable change was about to occur. Although she seemed to have that radiance that people talk about when they're expecting, it never seemed to light on me. The man I love and I are expecting a baby. One evening, Mom was stroking her belly and Kyle was beaming like he had won a prize. "Kyle, it's going to be perfect," Mom exclaimed. Trying to be charming at all times, Kyle said, "We'll need to redo the guest room, make it fit for a little princess." They were discussing my room, my small space in their universe, and it broke my heart. Trying not to stutter, I asked, "What about my room?" Mom gave me a look and tightened her smile. "Polly, you are free to relocate to the smaller room. It's just the newborn will require the room." The way she used the word fair suggested that there was no need for debate. Thus, I relocated, gathered my belongings, and took up residence in the house's tiniest room, which was no larger than a closet. After a quick turn of events, Mary was born. Everyone had nothing to say but about her. "Isn't she just the most beautiful baby you've ever seen?" Cradling Mary as though she were the most wonderful thing in the world, Mom would gush to her friends over the phone. "Yeah, she's cute," I would murmur, attempting to enter the dialogue. Cute was putting it mildly. Mary possessed an appealing quality that made me fall in love with her right away. I wanted to be involved, helpful, and a nice big sister. I tried to get into Mary's room one afternoon when Mom was in the kitchen. I crept in and peeked over my sister's crib to see her contentedly babbling. I softly said, "Hey there, Mary," and held out a finger for her to take. Mom, though, must have heard me because all of a sudden she was at the door with a knife-edged sharp voice. "Polly, what are you doing? I instructed you to inquire before entering her room," I argued, feeling the familiar sting of tears prickling my eyes. I just wanted to see her. Dad was different, though, and I wanted to assist. I confided in him on one of our Saturdays together over pizza at our go-to restaurant. "When I'm around Mary, Mom gets nervous all the time. She seemed to be afraid that I would break her or something," I remarked. After giving it some serious thought, Dad said, "You know, Polly, some people just have a hard time sharing love. They act as though there is a finite amount of resources available, but never forget that you have a big heart. Don't allow your mother's actions lead you to believe differently." His remarks did not entirely close the gap between us back at Mom's house, but they did assist a little. Mom would never listen to me when I tried to tell her stories about my friends or school. She would always spend half of her time watching Mary. I once won second place in the science fair and brought a school award home with me. I was giddy with excitement, holding onto the certificate as if it were a pass to their acceptance. I held it out to Mom, saying, "Look, Mom, I won this," as she was feeding Mary. She said, "That's nice, dear," without raising her eyes. "Put it on the fridge or something." Or something, I repeated to myself, but the meaning seemed hollow. I took a step back and somewhat crookedly placed the certificate on the fridge. It was just another document, just another day spent under Mary's watchful eye. Things at home were quite difficult by the time I started high school. I felt less like a member of the family and more like a guest because of Mom's chilly shoulders and Kyle's lack of interest. That's when the big news hit. Mom decided it was time for me to move in with Dad full-time. We were eating supper together the day she told me. It was one of those infrequent occasions when the table was exclusively hers and mine. Mary was already asleep when Kyle arrived home from work late. "Polly, we need to talk about your future," Mom said as she moved her meal about on the fork. Her tone was chilly and businesslike. There was no warmth about it, and that made me uneasy right away. "What about it?" I tried to seem nonchalant as I asked, but my heart was beating quickly. "After much consideration, we've decided that moving in with your father would be best for you. The arrival of the new baby has made things here, well, complex." I nearly asphyxiated on my water. "Are you moving in with Dad? However, why? I assumed everything in this place was okay." Mother let out an irritated sigh. "Look, Polly, you're no longer a child. We are unable to give you the privacy you require in this new environment. It's little and, to be honest, more expensive than we anticipated. This is better for all parties involved." I moved my plate away, having lost my appetite. "How about education? My pals?" She stated, "You can go to a new school and make new friends," as if changing schools was that easy, and that my life could be easily restarted. I had the impression that I had to completely delete my life and start anew. The next few weeks were a blur as I packed up my things, my whole world shrinking into boxes, books, clothes, and the few keepsakes that meant something to me. Kyle barely said goodbye, and Mary, too young to understand, gave me a confused hug. Moving day was tough. Dad lived on the other side of town in a small apartment. It was clean but cluttered with memories of a life paused since Mom left him. He was standing there waiting for me with open arms and a worried smile. When I arrived, the apartment was nothing like the house I grew up in. My new room was half the size of my old one, with walls that needed paint and a window that looked out at a brick wall. But it was quiet, and Dad was trying his best to make it feel like home. The first day of the new school was rough. As I walked down the crowded hallways, I could feel the stares and hear the whispers. "That's the new girl," they'd say, as if I were some kind of oddity. In class, I kept to myself, dibbling in my notebook and trying to block out the murmurs. When the bell rang, I was the first one out the door, not wanting to linger. At home, Dad noticed my mood. "How is school?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "It was fine," I lied, shrugging off my coat and dropping my bag by the door. "If it gets tough, you tell me, okay? We're in this together. You're not alone, Polly." His words meant a lot, but the loneliness I felt was deep. Knowing it wasn't just about missing my old friends or the big house, it was about feeling unwanted, like I was pushed out because I was too much of a burden. Adjusting to life at Dad's wasn't easy, but I quickly realized that if I didn't pull myself together, things would only get worse. One morning, I woke up, looked around my cramped room, and decided it was time to take charge of my life. "No one else is going to do it for me," I muttered under my breath. Dad noticed the change in me almost immediately. Over breakfast one day, he looked up from his coffee and said, "You're looking more determined these days, Polly. What's on your mind?" I stirred my cereal, thinking about how to put it into words. "I want to make something of myself, Dad. I don't want to end up stuck, you know." He nodded, a serious look crossing his face. "I hear you, kiddo. So what's the plan?" "That scholarship, the big one for the top students. I'm going to get it," I declared, more to convince myself than him. Dad's smile was all the encouragement I needed. "I needed that scholarship, and if anyone could get it, it was you," he said. "Just tell me what you need from me." School was tough, with long hours spent catching up and even longer evenings buried in books. My teachers noticed the change. Even the tough ones seemed to respect how hard I was working. Mr. Jeremy, my math teacher, kept me after class one day. "Polly, your work has improved a lot." "What's driving this?" he asked. "I need that scholarship," I replied bluntly, packing up my stuff. "I've got plans, and they don't include being stuck here forever." Mr. Jeremy studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, keep at it and let me know if you need extra help. I'm here." Making friends wasn't easy, but I managed to find a few people who didn't mind that I was focused on my goals. During lunch, I'd sit with Linda and Peter, two kids who weren't exactly popular, but knew how to laugh. "So, Polly, you're like a library ninja now, huh?" Peter joked one day, nudging me as we sat down with our trays. I cracked a smile. "Yeah, got to be stealthy if I want to snag the best study spots." Linda chimed in, her voice soft but sincere. "It's cool what you're doing, Polly. Most wouldn't bother." Days turned into months, and the pressure grew as the application deadlines got closer. Dad was my rock, always there with a hot meal and a listening ear whenever the stress became too much. The day I got the scholarship letter, my hands were shaking as I tore it open. Dad was right there, holding his breath. I scanned the words, my heart pounding, and then I cheered so loud the neighbors probably heard. "I got it, Dad. I got it." I jumped up, the letter flapping in my hand like a flag of victory. Dad swept me up in a big hug, laughing and cheering right along with me. I knew it. I knew you could do it. As I packed up my things for college a few months later, I felt ready. The future was bright, and for the first time, it felt like it was truly mine. I was leaving, but I was taking all these lessons, all this love, and hard-earned wisdom with me. After graduating with honors and establishing a solid career, I finally felt like I was on stable ground. I was 25, doing well at my job, and had just started dating a great guy from work named Eric, who had been nothing but supportive. Then, out of the blue, my mom called. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out, but suddenly here she was telling me something. Polly, your sister Mary is going to college in your city. We've paid her tuition, and we think it'd be best if she stayed with you, Mom said, making it clear this wasn't just a suggestion. I hesitated, memories of our strained relationship running through my mind, but I wanted to believe things could be different this time. Okay, Mom, I'll help Mary out. It might be nice to reconnect, I said, trying to keep any doubts out of my voice. Mary moved in 2 weeks later, and it was obvious right away that we were very different. She was as stunning as ever, completely focused on her looks and living a high-maintenance lifestyle. She brought with her a suitcase full of expectations and a personality that expected them to be met. Can you make sure we have almond milk and kale? I'm on a special diet, Mary said casually on her first evening, checking herself out in the mirror. Sure, I'll add them to the grocery list, I replied, trying to be accommodating. But living with Mary turned out to be harder than I expected. She partied like there was no tomorrow, often coming home at dawn, her carefree laughter echoing through the apartment while I lay awake worrying about work meetings and presentations. One afternoon, Eric came over while Mary was getting ready for another night out. I noticed how she smiled at him just a bit too sweetly, and for a bit too long. After she left, Eric spoke up. Polly, I think Mary's got the wrong idea about me. She's been, well, flirty. I felt a wave of anger and embarrassment. Thanks for telling me, Eric. I'll talk to her. When I confronted Mary, she just laughed it off. Oh, come on, Polly. I'm just being friendly. Besides, can I help it if he likes me back? That's my fiancé. I said, my voice firm. You need to respect that. Her laugh turned cold. Polly, I'm used to getting what I want. I always have. That was the last straw. I couldn't live like this, feeling like I had to guard my life from my own sister. You need to find another place to live, Mary. This isn't working out, I said, making it clear that I meant it. I told her my decision was final, and Mary stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Within an hour, my phone rang. It was Mom, and her voice was cold and sharp. You're such a jealous girl, Polly. You can't stand to see your sister happy, can you? I just want respect, Mom. That's all, I replied, but it was like talking to a wall. After that, things went quiet between Mary and me. I heard through the grapevine that she dropped out of college and was drifting through her social circles on charm and whims. As for me, I refocused on my life with Eric, my work, and rebuilding my boundaries. 3 years flew by since I last tried to patch things up with my family. Things were going well for me. I was moving up at work, and life with Eric was better than ever. That's when I heard the news about Mary. She had dropped out of college and was getting married to some rich guy she'd met. Feeling a mix of curiosity and goodwill, I picked up the phone to call home and offer my congratulations. Mom answered, her voice cold and distant as always. Mom, I heard about Mary's wedding. I just wanted to say congratulations. I started, trying to keep my tone light. Well, don't bother. We're not waiting for you at the wedding. It's for rich people only, and we don't need any beggars there. She spat out her words, cutting deep. I clenched the phone a little tighter, feeling the old sting of rejection. Really, Mom? That's how you're going to be? What did you expect, Polly? You've always been the difficult one. Just stay away, she said before hanging up. I stood there, phone in hand, the dial tone echoing in my ear. The hurt was real, but I wasn't going to let it ruin me. I found out later that they'd spared no expense on Mary's wedding, hiring popular artists and actors to make it a lavish affair. Time passed, and life didn't stand still for me either. Eric proposed, and suddenly, I was planning my own wedding. Nothing extravagant, but every bit filled with love and sincerity. I called Dad to share the news. He was overjoyed. Polly, that's wonderful. You bet I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world, he said, his voice brimming with happiness. Encouraged by Dad's reaction, I made one last attempt to bridge the gap with my mom. I dialed her number, my heart racing as I waited for her to pick up. Mom, I'm getting married. I want you to come, I said, holding my breath. Her reply was as cold as a winter breeze. No, Polly, not interested in attending some modest gathering of losers. Count me out. I swallowed hard, fighting back the hurt. All right, Mom. Take care, I said and hung up, knowing it was probably the last time I'd invite her into my life. Our wedding day was simple but beautiful. Dad walked me down the aisle, his presence a steady comfort. The room was filled with genuine smiles and heartfelt congratulations, a stark contrast to the grandeur and coldness of Mary's wedding spectacle. Our modest reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and stories. Eric and I mingled with friends and family who loved us for who we were, not for money or status. Life was going well, and Eric and I were thrilled to be expecting our first child. Then, one ordinary afternoon, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end turned my day upside down. It was Mom, and she wasn't calling to congratulate me. Polly, you have to take us in. We're desperate, she blurted out without even a hello. Mom, what's going on? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. It's all gone wrong. Kyle's business failed. We mortgaged the house for Mary's wedding, and now it's all just gone. And your sister's marriage is over. Her husband kicked her out and is demanding money for her cheating. She explained hurriedly, her voice edged with panic. I took a deep breath, trying to process the flood of information. Okay, slow down. What exactly are you asking of me? We need a place to stay, all of us. We're coming to your house, she stated matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious solution. The request, or rather the demand, hit me hard. No, Mom, you can't just decide to move in with us. It doesn't work like that. Polly, you owe us after everything we've done for you, she snapped, her voice sharp and commanding. That struck a nerve. Oh, Mom, remember how you were when I needed you most. You pushed me out. You chose everything over me, and now you expect me to just open my doors. You raised your voice. Polly, you're being egotistical. Is your sense of family still present? You've never allowed me to forget that I am your mother. However, motherhood isn't as defined as you may believe. It's not about making demands. I shot back, getting impatient. Even over the phone, her rage was evident. Polly, you'll regret doing this. I may even go to court to receive what I'm entitled to. I laughed out. though more out of incredulity than anything else. Go ahead, Mom, and try. Recall that my father was my protector when you expelled me. Which claim are you going to make? That when you kicked your daughter out, she wouldn't allow you to live off of her? She eventually snarled before hanging up, and there was a moment during which I could practically hear her thinking, "This isn't over, Polly." Life felt like a real new beginning following that final contact with Mom. Eric and I were preoccupied with preparing the nursery, choosing paint colors, putting the crib together, and managing the typical highs and lows of pregnancy. I was arranging some baby clothing we had recently purchased, putting them nicely into the new dresser, on a bright and early Friday morning. While in the corner, Eric was using an electric screwdriver, making a buzzing sound. He stopped and gave me a quick wipe of his forehead before grinning at me. "Polly, how are things doing over there? Do you need any assistance?" "I understand. Thank you." Simply contemplating everything. "Really? This is happening?" I touched a small, flimsy onsie in response. "It is, in fact," Eric announced. "We're going to be parents," with astonishment and a hint of apprehensive enthusiasm in his voice. A knock on the door occurred at that very moment. It astonished me. Who could it be on a Friday morning thus early? I carried on organizing while Eric went to answer it. After I heard voices, Eric yelled, "Polly, this is for you." I was taken aback to see my dad standing in the living room, holding a teddy bear and grinning broadly. "A surprise," he cried out. "What are you doing here, Dad?" I hurried over to give him a great embrace, unable to contain my excitement. He handed me the soft, cuddly teddy bear and added, "I wanted to come and see how my favorite daughter is doing, and I brought something for my future grandchild." "I'm grateful, Dad. That you're here means the world to me," I said, a little choked up. After we took a seat, Dad took in the half-built baby furniture and the piles of baby books. "It appears like you're about ready for the tiny one," he remarked. "We're making an effort. We're excited, albeit it's a lot," I said to him before pausing and biting my lip. "Dad, Mom and I spoke on the phone again. Things didn't go smoothly." Dad became serious in his expression. "Your mom told me about it. Was she not overly happy, was she?" "No, she wasn't. But I didn't back down, Dad. I needed to, for the baby, for Eric, and for myself. Here we need peace," I firmly stated. We spent the day laughing and telling stories, and just hanging out with Dad, who occasionally offered us some amusing parenting advice. It was a pleasant day, the kind of day you know you'll remember with nostalgia. Dad, Eric, and I were sitting on the porch watching the sun set and the sky become pink and orange, with a light breeze rustling the leaves. Eric enveloped me with his arm, and I snuggled closer to him. I looked out at the waning light and added, "I feel lucky we have each other, and we're about to start this amazing new chapter, despite everything with Mom and all the drama. I think it's going to be fantastic." "That's going to happen." Eric gave me a head kiss and said, "We've got this, Polly." I was deeply content and prepared for what lay ahead as night fell, and Dad said his farewell. Even though my mom's difficulties and the uncertainty of fresh starts had been difficult, they had brought me to this point where I am now surrounded by love and support. I made the decision to execute the strategy I had been considering for some time on the day my dad returned home. I added the medicine to his tea, giving it a good swirl to ensure it dissolved fully. I then gave him the cup and watched, unperturbed, as he drank it all. Noticing that the medicine would take 4 hours to kick in, we left the house shortly after. We had to exercise patience, because the medicine was supposed to render him unconscious. My dad's house has CCTV cameras, so I hooked them up to my phone so I could watch everything that happened there, even while I wasn't present. It was a wise decision, and knowing that I could always see what was happening brought me comfort. 5 hours later, I looked at my phone and began to watch the live feed. My dad was fully unconscious, laying on the living room couch, just as I had anticipated. He wasn't even moving. That's when I was caught off guard. Lauren, my dad's girlfriend, entered the room and discovered him unconscious. She approached him and smacked him in the face in an attempt to rouse him up, rather than freaking out or running for assistance. But he merely lay there, unconscious, giving no response at all. Lauren accomplished something unexpected instead of being alarmed or anxious. She became animated and began to hop up and down. She seemed to have been waiting for this very time. She took out her phone and made a video call to someone after her small celebration. There was a man with a broad smile on his face who answered the phone. Lauren informed him, "Baby, the old fool is dead. We own wealth." She firmly believed that my dad had passed away and that she would now receive his entire estate. My dad had modified his will to give everything to Lauren, but Lauren had been tricked into thinking that. It all began when my dad told us Lauren was his new girlfriend and introduced her to our family. We initially assumed he was kidding. My dad is 75 years old, and his name is Scott. Now that I'm an adult, most of my siblings and I are married. My wife and I still intend to have children, although my 3 older siblings are now parents. My father is a well-off man, together with my late mother. They started from the ground up 2 prosperous beverage companies. They put in countless hours to establish their businesses, and as a result, their items are well known. My dad never remarried, and my mom passed away 12 years ago. We were so astonished when he unexpectedly called us all at once and presented us to Lauren. We believed that day that my dad had called us together for one of his customary family gatherings, during which he provides us counsel. But we were all in disbelief when we saw Lauren. We were baffled as to how she could be in a relationship with someone as old as my dad, since she appeared so youthful. Initially, I assumed she was merely a new housekeeper he had brought on board. However, my father introduced her with pride, adding, "This is Lauren, my new girlfriend. Please treat her with the same decency that you do for me. Nobody has expressed interest in me since your mother passed away, but Lauren did. I'm content with her." I was confused and angry at the same time when I heard this. How did they come to be together? When did this romantic partnership begin? Did they truly feel in love? I couldn't help but wonder what she wanted from us. Does she even love you? I asked my father. With confidence, he responded, "She loves me." After a month of dating, I can't express how content I felt. She feels the same way, baby, and she's the nicest thing that has happened to me since your mother. Lauren gave me a nod, but I wasn't sold. My dad was 75 years old, and she was only 27. Given their stark age differences, it was difficult for her to think she could ever love him. "How old are you?" Still attempting to make sense of the situation, I asked Lauren. I was astonished to learn that she was 27. It supported my theories. The only reason a young lady like her would be drawn to a man my dad's age is because of his wealth. I had no doubts that she was after his fortune. I tried to talk sense into his ears and said, "Dad, you need to break up with her. She's too young, and you can't seriously think she's in love with you." However, my dad would not listen because his love for Lauren was too strong. He thought she really did love him, but I knew otherwise. I was more sure than ever that she was only with him for the benefits she might obtain, especially after seeing her rejoice on the security camera film. "She's young enough to be your grandchild, Dad, and I'm 52. It doesn't feel right at all." What I was seeing and hearing was beyond belief. My father, a 70-year-old guy, was seeing a woman who was just 27 years old on a serious basis. It was difficult for me to comprehend the stark disparity in age. It turned out that I wasn't alone in feeling this way. My sister immediately chimed in, her voice solid and uncompromising, confirming what I had said. She turned to Lauren and said, "Dad, this is wrong in so many ways. And you, young lady, there's no way you're genuinely in love with my father." I find it hard to believe. But Lauren didn't seem to mind that we couldn't believe it. She gave us a serious look and said, "I know you find it difficult to believe someone so young," in a calm and collected manner. "But please know that I really do really like your dad. I've never been drawn to younger men, which is why I've never been in a relationship. I've never regretted a day I spent with your dad. He's the first man I've dated. I cherish him." Her words were smooth and convincing. Even I had to admit she was good with her words. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it that made it so believable. She didn't need to do much more than talk, and somehow she managed to lower our defenses. My sister and I exchanged looks, still skeptical, but also unsure of how to respond. Could she be telling the truth? Could someone so young really fall for a man so much older? We spent the rest of that day at my dad's house, trying to get to know Lauren better. She was incredibly hospitable, going out of her way to make us feel comfortable. She even prepared a delicious meal for us. And my sister, who rarely complimented anyone, couldn't stop raving about how good the food was. Lauren was so thoughtful that she even packed some extra food for my sister to take home, knowing how much she had enjoyed it. There was something so humble and down-to-earth about Lauren that made it hard to dislike her. She was kind, polite, and seemed genuinely interested in our family. After that day, we met Lauren a couple more times, and with each meeting, our skepticism slowly began to fade. She was consistent in her kindness and care, always making sure my dad was happy and well taken care of. My dad, who had been lonely for so long after my mom passed away, seemed to have found new joy in life with Lauren by his side. He would call me nearly every evening, his voice full of excitement as he recounted the day's events. He talked about how Lauren helped him with everything from cooking to laundry, even washing the dishes after meals. They went out on dates regularly, and he always sounded so happy, almost like he was reliving the days when my mom was still alive. It was strange, but in a way, it felt like my mom had come back into our lives, not in the same form, but through Lauren. As the months passed, my siblings and I found ourselves growing fond of Lauren. We couldn't help it. She was just so lovable. She wasn't just there for my dad. She also took an interest in our lives. I owned a small restaurant at the time, and although it wasn't very big, Lauren would often stop by to help me out with various tasks. She was always willing to lend a hand, whether it was in the kitchen or with organizing things around the place. My older siblings, who had children of their own, also appreciated her help. She would visit them from time to time and offer to babysit or help with whatever they needed. About 6 months into their relationship, my dad dropped another bombshell on us. He and Lauren were getting married. I remember the day he invited us over to share the news. He was practically glowing with excitement, like a young man who had just fallen in love for the first time. But there was something strange about the whole thing. According to my dad, Lauren had proposed to him. She had taken him out on a date at a nice restaurant, and in the middle of their meal, she had pulled out a ring and asked him to marry her. I was stunned. It's not every day you hear about a woman proposing to a man, especially not in a situation like this. It was supposed to be the other way around, wasn't it? Why would she take the initiative to propose after just 8 months of dating? It didn't add up. When we asked my dad why she did it, he said that Lauren was afraid he might not want to marry her because of the age difference. She was worried that he would hesitate, thinking she was too young, so she decided to prove that she was serious about their relationship by proposing to herself. My dad thought it was cute and thoughtful, a sign of her commitment and readiness for marriage. I wasn't so sure. The whole situation felt off, but my dad seemed genuinely happy, and Lauren continued to be as sweet and supportive as ever. It was hard to argue against the marriage when both of them seemed so certain about it. I wanted to believe that Lauren's intentions were pure, that she truly loved my dad and wasn't just after his money. But there was always that nagging doubt in the back of my mind, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The wedding was a small affair, just close family and a few friends. My dad was over the moon, and Lauren looked radiant in her wedding dress. As I watched them exchange vows, I couldn't help but wonder if this was really what was best for him. Could a marriage built on such an unusual foundation really last? Only time would tell. In the weeks following the wedding, things seemed to settle into a routine. Lauren moved in with my dad, and they started their new life together. My siblings and I continued to visit, and each time, Lauren was as warm and welcoming as ever. She made my dad happy, and that was what mattered most. But despite her charm and the way she had won us over, there was still a part of me that remained cautious, always watching for signs that her intentions might not be as genuine as they seemed. Looking back now, I realized that my initial concerns were valid. Lauren had been very strategic in the way she presented herself to us, carefully crafting an image of the perfect partner for my dad. She knew exactly what to say and do to win our trust, and in the end, we were all taken in by her act. But as time went on, the cracks in her facade began to show, revealing a different side of her, one that was more focused on what she could gain than on truly loving and caring for my father. It's hard to admit, but I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. My dad deserved better, and it pains me to think that we didn't see through Lauren's act until it was too late. Love can be blind, and sometimes it takes more than just good intentions to protect the people we care about. At first, I thought the same as everyone else. It made sense to me that Lauren might have believed my dad would never marry her because of the significant age gap between them. So when she proposed to him herself, I saw it as a clear sign that she was genuinely ready for marriage. That's what I convinced myself to believe. So I decided to support her in every way I could. My siblings seemed to share the same reasoning. We all came to an agreement that their marriage was okay, even if deep down we had our doubts. It wasn't as if our disagreement would have stopped the wedding anyway. Our dad was determined to go through with it. As we began preparing for the wedding, I noticed something that seemed a bit off. Lauren was very insistent on having a court wedding instead of the traditional church ceremony. This struck me as odd, given that our family had always valued religious ceremonies. I voiced my concerns, and my siblings did the same. We felt that a church wedding would be more appropriate and meaningful, especially considering my dad's age and the traditions we were used to. My dad found himself torn between wanting to make Lauren happy and holding on to his own values. He wanted to give her the court wedding she asked for, but the idea didn't sit well with him. It was a tough situation, and we spent a lot of time discussing it. Lauren was clearly disappointed when we pushed back against her wishes, but eventually, we managed to convince her to go with the church wedding instead. Although she reluctantly agreed, it was clear that she wasn't happy about the decision. On the day of the wedding, something felt off again. Lauren didn't seem as excited as we had expected. Her demeanor was subdued, and she didn't have the radiant joy that most brides have on their wedding day. We were all fooled into thinking that she might have been feeling unwell, perhaps just dealing with a headache or pre-wedding jitters. We felt bad for her, and my sister in particular spent a lot of time comforting her and staying close to her throughout the day. We chalked it up to nerves and hoped that once the ceremony was over, everything would go back to normal. After the wedding, life for my dad and Lauren began. For the first 3 months, my siblings and I decided to give them some space. We thought it would be best to let them enjoy their new life together without us constantly dropping by. We wanted our dad to have all the fun and happiness he deserved with his new wife. Looking back, I realize now that this was a mistake, a silly one that we would later regret. It wasn't until 5 months later that I finally visited my dad. As soon as I saw him, I noticed something was different. He seemed quieter than usual, and it was clear that he had lost some weight. His clothes looked a bit looser, and his face had a tired, worn-out look that I wasn't used to seeing. When I asked him if he was okay, he put on a smile and assured me that everything was fine, but I knew my dad too well. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and I could tell that something was bothering him. While we were talking, Lauren walked into the living room. I noticed that my dad flinched slightly as she entered, which made me frown. It was a subtle reaction, but it was enough to raise my suspicions even more. Lauren greeted me with her usual cheerful smile and sat down next to my dad, resting her head on his shoulder. We chatted for a while, but the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I made the decision to speak with Lauren privately as I prepared to leave. In an attempt to learn more about my dad's situation, I invited her to accompany me on a walk to my car. I turned to face her as we were walking and inquired, "Is my dad okay? He has a unique appearance, and he acts strangely. What is happening?" I saw Lauren's happy disposition rapidly disappear. She avoided my glance and cast her eyes to the ground. In a quiet, frustrated voice, she finally stated, "Your dad isn't making me happy, Scott. Since our marriage, he has remained aloof. Sometimes he pushes me away, and other times he even orders me out of the bedroom." Her remarks came as a huge brick to me. "What? Are you telling the truth? You're sent out of the room by him?" I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. "Yes," she answered, casting a sorrowful yet irate glance at me. "Is it really true? Even though I'm his wife and a young woman, he treats me badly." Discerning herself, she shook her head. I was taken aback. This was nothing like my dad. He had always been kind, especially to the people he cared about. I became much more concerned after hearing Lauren explain his actions. There was undoubtedly a problem, and I had to find the cause. I walked out of our talk feeling sad. All of the things Lauren had told me were on repeat in my mind. The perception of my father as aloof and dismissive of her didn't align with the person I knew. However, I also couldn't deny that Lauren was sincere in her upset. I had begun to think that perhaps she actually did care about my dad, because she had always been so kind to him and our family. I wasn't so sure now, though. I spent the following several days trying to piece together what could be going on. After talking to my siblings, I learned that they had also observed certain changes in our dad while they were here. He appeared to have lost some of his former verve and had become quieter and more reclusive. Though none of us could quite put our finger on it, we could all agree that something wasn't right. I finally made the decision to speak with my dad face to face. I had to hear him tell it as it was and see what the genuine situation was. I sat him down and begged him to be honest with me when I saw him again. I informed him of Lauren's words and shared my worries on his conduct and well-being. He'd attempted to dismiss it at first, saying that everything was all right. Despite his attempts to conceal the reality, I persisted and told him so. He let out a final sigh and acknowledged that things hadn't gone as smoothly as he had intended. Although he loved Lauren, he informed me that the age gap was beginning to wear him down. Relationship stress was arising since he was finding it difficult to match her enthusiasm and needs. He acknowledged feeling bad for not being able to provide Lauren with the life she deserved. He felt as like he was stifling her because he knew how young and full of life she was. That explained his lack of closeness and his occasional nighttime expulsion of her from the room. The possibility that their relationship would not turn out as he had hoped was something he didn't want to confront. My heart hurt to hear this. Normally a robust, self-assured man, my dad appeared weak and uncertain these days. It was painful to realize that he was facing this alone, even though I could see he was having difficulties. I reassured him that my siblings and I would be here to support him and that he didn't have to face this alone. It also occurred to me that Lauren wasn't totally at fault. It wasn't fair to criticize her without taking into account that she had her own challenges and expectations. I realized I had to speak with her once more, but with greater understanding and compassion. Ultimately, I discovered that partnerships, particularly those involving such a large age difference, have unique difficulties. It wasn't easy for either of them to negotiate the challenging scenario that my dad and Lauren were in. The most important thing was that they were both determined to make it work and were prepared to work hard to get over their challenges. I had a range of feelings when I left my dad's house that day. Though there was still plenty to work through, I had faith that my dad and Lauren could find happiness in their marriage with time and honest communication. We would be there for them every step of the journey as a family. It seems like he doesn't love me, even though I deserve his attention. Lauren said, "Jack, I'm so sad." I felt so bad to hear her say that. I have to admit that I felt bad for her because it sounded like she was truly hurt. I assured her I would attempt to figure out what was going on by speaking with my dad. After expressing her gratitude, she left the house. When I went to see my dad the following time, I saw that things had gotten worse. Compared to earlier, he was more reserved and hardly spoke to me. His actions were so peculiar that I became anxious and frustrated. I left his house in a rage, not knowing what to do since I could take it no more. I got an unexpected call from my dad's attorney as I was leaving. He told me my dad had been in touch with him recently to modify his will. My dad wanted to leave everything to Lauren, the lawyer said. I was astonished to hear this news. Something like this caught me off guard right away. I never expected it. I made the decision to tell my siblings about this, in an attempt to ascertain the true nature of the situation. We all decided to pay our dad a visit. When we got to his place 6 days later, it was strangely quiet and deserted. To my astonishment, when I rushed up to his room, he was unconscious and lying on the floor. We hurried him to the hospital after I swiftly called my siblings to offer assistance. Lauren's response surprised me when I saw her at the hospital. "Is he dead?" was the first thing she said. "I can't let him die just yet. Has he already modified his will? He's not going to die." I got a shiver from what she said. How could she care more about the will than if my father was still alive? Although my father wasn't dead, her response raised serious doubts in my mind. I went up to her and said, "What are you saying? My dad is still alive." "Well, he said he had some changes to do," stammered Lauren, suddenly chilled. She scratched her head. "I was afraid he might not get the opportunity to achieve that before passing away. Whatever became of my husband?" Her actions just increased my suspicions. Why was she concentrating so much on the will? And why would she presume he was dead right away? Unless she had some other agenda, it didn't make sense. At last, my dad opened his eyes and began sobbing violently. He refused to tell us why he was so angry, even when we tried to console him. To my further skepticism, he asked Lauren to exit the room instead. My siblings and I both felt that something was really wrong. We started to worry that Lauren was just after our dad's money, and that she might be abusing him. We couldn't miss the major signal that she was extremely worried about the will. We also wondered why our father would want to make such a big alteration to his will all of a sudden. He didn't usually make decisions like this without talking to us first. We began to suspect that perhaps Lauren had coerced him into doing it. It was unusual enough on its own that she had been the one to propose marriage in the first place. We devised a strategy because we were determined to know the truth. We made the decision to investigate on our own as we knew that our dad would never let us know if something was amiss. We had a conversation with the family physician who had been my dad's caretaker for many years before we left the hospital. We told him about our worries and pleaded for his assistance because we had total faith in him. The medication the doctor offered us might put a person to sleep for up to a full day, giving the impression that they were deceased. We were going to utilize this to test Lauren's reaction in the event that she believed my dad was dead. In order to give us time to covertly place cameras throughout their home, we also made arrangements for Lauren to stay in the hospital with my dad for an additional 3 days. We could then keep an eye on everything that transpired once they got back home. I mixed the medicine thoroughly into my dad's tea the day he got home to make sure he wouldn't notice anything out of the ordinary. We knew the medicine would take 4 hours to work fully after he drank it, so we left the house. To watch everything in real time, I had connected the cameras to my phone. Anxiously, we awaited the revelation of Lauren's true intents through our arrangements. The cameras we set up allowed me to see and hear everything that was going on in my dad's house. I started watching the video on my phone 7 hours later. As expected, my dad had passed out in the living room. I was stunned by what transpired next. My dad was unconscious in the room when Lauren entered. She tried to rouse him up by slapping him, but instead of freaking out or running for help, my dad was completely unconscious, which astonished me. He didn't move at all. Even more unsettling was what Lauren did after that. Rather than show signs of worry or anxiety, she began to hop up and down, obviously excited. She seemed to have been waiting for this very time. She hastily took out her phone and placed a video call to someone following her little party. I heard her say, "The old fool is dead, baby," to a man on the other end of the call. "We own wealth." She truly believed that my dad had passed away, and that she would soon receive his entire estate. Lauren was duped by the lawyer, which she was unaware of. The lawyer informed me that Lauren had been to see him and inquired about the will after he had called. He told her a falsehood, sensing that something was off, claiming that my dad had actually amended his will to give her everything. The attorney knew how to handle the case because he had worked with our family for a long time. I was really appreciative of his prompt thoughts. I called my siblings and the cops right away, while Lauren was partying with the man on the phone. All of us hurried to my dad's house with the intention of catching her in the act. Lauren was shocked beyond belief as we barged into the house. She made an unsuccessful attempt to flee. She was handcuffed and brought directly to the station by the police. It was found in the police station that Lauren had been planning to con my dad with her boyfriend, a 24-year-old. They were both brought to court after the boyfriend was also taken into custody. When my dad learned the truth, he was devastated, but he didn't let it stop him. He severed all contact with Lauren right away and got a divorce. My dad was finally honest with us when Lauren was taken into custody. He acknowledged that she had been mistreating him physically and mentally. In addition, he acknowledged that he felt guilty and let down by himself for not seeing through her sooner. He was happy, though, that we had freed him from her snare. In addition, my dad was very clear that he would never date or get married to anyone again. Relationships were over for him after this awful incident. Lauren was accused of fraud and both physical and emotional abuse in court. Her lover was given 20 years in prison for being an accomplice, while she was given a 30-year sentence. Lauren started crying and apologizing to us as she was being taken away. Lauren's parents, who were also crying, informed us that their daughter had escaped from home and they had mistakenly believed her to be lost. Although we were sorry for them, we also recognized that Lauren needed to pay a price for her actions. She was nothing more than a greedy person attempting to profit from my father's generosity and resources. I appreciate you seeing. Please remember to subscribe by clicking the I subscribed comment below. We will try our best to respond to your comment. When my friend Benjamin told me that he had sold the house my father had left me for $660,000, I was completely taken aback. He called from the hospital with a stunning happiness in his voice as he broke the news. To my further surprise, he disclosed that he was taking a trip with his mistress. I found the whole situation to be utterly ridiculous, and I found it difficult to comprehend Benjamin's reasoning behind making such a decision about a place that was so meaningful to me. In addition, he said nonchalantly that he planned to move away from his family, which included his daughter Nancy. I was profoundly offended by Benjamin's lack of concern for his daughter, about whom he grumbled that she was growing increasingly conceited and bothersome. I was furious at his callous remarks about his child. I was angry and disbelieving at the same time as I struggled to process the confusing news of the property sale and his plans to leave his family. I thought I would lose my sense of reality. I had to intervene to prevent Benjamin from recklessly selling the house. I'm Carol, a 39-year-old stay-at-home mom. My life has become more and more difficult with my spouse Benjamin and our 9-year-old daughter Nancy. A year or so of persistent suspicions about Benjamin's infidelity have contributed to the rising discord in the marriage. His habits, such as going out late at bars, coming home smelling odd, and purchasing pricey gifts that weren't for me, alarmed me even though I didn't have any concrete evidence. However, I've been too afraid to approach him about his potential affair, which has prevented me from acting decisively. When I think back on our relationship, the Benjamin I fell in love with 11 years ago comes to me. I was first drawn to him by his warmth and sincerity, and our marriage began happily. But things really started to go south when Nancy turned 1. Being a full-time homemaker, parenting proved to be more demanding, and I required Benjamin's assistance with meals and showers. He felt irritated as these duties became commonplace and eventually stopped being an active dad. He started to argue that since I was a stay-at-home mother, I should be responsible for taking care of the kids. Benjamin was always making bitter comments, and he would frequently withdraw into our bedroom and leave Nancy and me alone. There was less of him interacting with Nancy as he grew more distant. He dismissed her, saying he was too busy and that playing was my job, even on his days off. Nancy was often reprimanded by Benjamin for crying, and he blamed my parenting for any problems that arose rather than taking into account her feelings. We would frequently withdraw to our room and play alone in order to shield Nancy from his hurtful remarks. It hurts to witness how our once content marriage has descended into such tension and turmoil, with me having to deal with these issues mainly on my own. Living with my daughter Nancy meant that I rarely had time for me, even when I felt like I needed some alone time for hobbies like reading or watching movies. Benjamin was frequently pursuing his love of auto racing in the meantime. We were dependent on his salary, so even though it felt unjust, I was hesitant to express my displeasure. Throughout the 9 years of our marriage, this feeling of helplessness and irritation had been steadily increasing. Benjamin's harsh language and lack of interest in parenting had become distressingly common. It was a far cry from the considerate and loving man I had married. Despite these difficulties, I realized that we had to keep things stable for Nancy's sake, because our income was reliant on Benjamin's work. Nancy complimented my artistic abilities and suggested I sketch my career one afternoon while we were painting together. Nancy, in contrast to my own restrained disposition, had developed into a straightforward, joyful, and honest girl, even in the face of Benjamin's frequent dismissive attitude. Seeing her succeed in school, gain popularity among her peers, and become a teacher's favorite was encouraging. Her praise for my drawings gave me more self-assurance and pride, since it showed me how much she appreciated and noticed the work I had put into them. Her optimism, which shone light on our family's difficult dynamics, was something I treasured. Nancy's ability to make me grin gave me the strength to tackle the recurring difficulties. But our home life took a usual turn for the worse that evening. After drinking, Benjamin passed out in the living room. His drinking had grown more and more concerning. A piece of paper dropped out as I was succeeding in taking off his jacket. It was a motel receipt, an unequivocal and devastating affirmation of my long-held concerns regarding his adultery. "Hide my inner agony, please." I slipped the receipt onto a shelf and went to bed, wondering how I would tell Benjamin what I had discovered the following morning. I was left alone with my thoughts in the middle of my daily tasks when Benjamin, who was barely sober, departed the home before Nancy went to school. It became more and more difficult to keep up the facade of a happy relationship or to deny the truth when the motel receipt was discovered. Although I knew something needed to happen, I was intimidated by the road ahead. I had to talk to Benjamin immediately, expecting an admission, maybe an apology. Over the next few days, as I was buried in these thoughts, I was startled out of my meditation by the abrupt vibration of my smartphone. I became anxious when I saw a strange number flash on screen. The caller identified themselves as a member of the General Hospital personnel when I reluctantly answered. They told me that Benjamin had been sent to the emergency department in a hurry and was currently having surgery to treat a serious kidney condition. Benjamin's condition was grave, the doctor indicated, and a kidney transplant might be necessary. I listened as the doctor explained the seriousness of the surgery and the requirement for a transplant, feeling overwhelmed by this abrupt turn in our lives. I felt myself not wanting to lose Benjamin that night, even if his mockery and infidelity had hurt me. While I thought about the scary prospect of his operation, I held on to the optimism that he would recover. The hunt for a prospective kidney donor got underway over time. I was, rather unexpectedly, the ideal fit. Our story took on a deeper complexity when it became clear that, despite our tense relationship, I could save Benjamin. Benjamin's parents became involved as well, adding to the complexity of the situation. Though they were elderly, they were quite concerned. I had to balance the chance of a restored relationship through this life-saving act against our tumultuous past when deciding whether or not to donate a kidney. Despite my imperfect health, Benjamin had no siblings, and our matched blood types made me the most appropriate donor. Admittedly, I had serious reservations about undergoing the surgery. However, the overriding importance of preserving Benjamin's life helped me overcome these hesitations. Recognizing the irreplaceable value of his presence, I decided to proceed as his kidney donor. When I discussed Benjamin's condition and our upcoming surgery with Nancy, she responded with understanding and encouragement. She stayed with my in-laws during my hospitalization. Despite their health issues, they were able to care for her. Nancy enjoyed a close bond with her grandparents, and knowing she was in good hands provided me with immense relief. With that peace of mind, I underwent the kidney transplant surgery, which surprisingly was completed more quickly than I had anticipated. I spent about a week in the hospital while Benjamin needed 8 days to recover. Thankfully, there were no complications, and both of our recoveries proceeded smoothly. Just before I was due to be discharged, my phone rang, sending a shiver down my spine. I answered the call, bracing myself for another unexpected twist. As I spoke to Benjamin, who had just received my kidney, I expected words of thanks for the life-saving donation and asked about his recovery. But the conversation took a shocking turn. In an unsettlingly cheerful tone, he revealed that he had sold our house for $660,000 and was planning a trip with his mistress. I was stunned by the news. It felt like a lightning strike. That house wasn't just any property. It was a cherished inheritance from my father, now thoughtlessly sold off. Benjamin's brazen announcement that he also had a mistress added another layer of shock. In my state of disbelief, I asked about our daughter's welfare, only to be met with his cold indifference. He said he didn't care and was planning to leave her behind. This revelation left me both enraged and appalled. The idea that he would sell the house and abandon his daughter was incomprehensible. Determined to take action, I realized I had to prevent Benjamin from rashly giving up our home. As our call ended abruptly, I was left in a whirlwind of emotions, grappling with his shocking decisions and figuring out how to protect our home and Nancy's future. Struggling to grasp the reality of Benjamin selling our house while he was still in the hospital, the stress worsened my condition, leading to an extended hospital stay. Feeling helpless and distressed, I lay in the hospital bed for days, pondering my next moves. My first instinct was to reach out to Nancy. Without the house, we would have nowhere to live. Despite my anger at Benjamin for his audacious actions and his affair, my primary concern was for Nancy's well-being. I decided to call her at my in-laws' house, where she answered the phone. I anxiously asked Nancy how she was coping and if she felt lonely, especially with the news of our house being sold by her dad. Her response was unexpectedly reassuring. She calmly informed me that she had managed to handle the situation, explaining that her dad had instructed his mistress to sell the house. Nancy's mature handling of this surprising turn of events left me both surprised and proud. She reassured me that everything was fine and expressed her gratitude for my concern. Encouraged by Nancy's composed demeanor, I felt a bit of peace settle within me. However, curiosity about what was currently happening with Benjamin and his mistress lingered. Reminding myself of the need for rest, I allowed sleep to take over. After 4 days of recovery, I was discharged from the hospital and made my way to my in-laws' house. Upon arrival, Nancy greeted me with joy, and my mother-in-law welcomed me back with a gentle smile, expressing her happiness. In contrast, my father-in-law's expression was grim as he apologized for Benjamin's actions. I was baffled at how Benjamin could stray so far from the values instilled by his wonderful parents. Despite their apologies, I acknowledged that perhaps I should have spoken up sooner. As we talked, my in-laws expressed their determination not to let Benjamin have his way. Intrigued and somewhat anxious, Nancy and I decided to head home. However, on our way, we encountered an unexpected scene in front of a realtor's office. There, we saw a disheveled Benjamin and an unknown woman, presumably his mistress, engaged in a heated argument. Benjamin, dressed in sweatpants and with unkempt hair, appeared visibly distressed. His mistress, wearing a short skirt and only one high heel, looked frustrated as she complained about the house not being sold and a canceled purchase deal of $660,000. The chaotic scene unfolded before us, adding another layer of complexity to our already tumultuous situation. Benjamin's angry gestures and his mistress's loud complaints drew shocked looks from passers-by. Nancy and I, equally surprised, approached them seeking an explanation. Upon questioning Benjamin about his actions, he and his mistress were visibly taken aback, gasping in surprise. Accusations flew immediately, with Benjamin suggesting that I must have talked the buyer out of the deal. Dismissing their baseless claims and instinctively protecting Nancy behind me, I stood firm, ready to address the mess that had unfolded. I stood firm against their accusations, deeply troubled by the unfolding drama. The realtor, caught in the middle of this chaos, reacted with disbelief upon discovering that I was Benjamin's wife. The cancellation of the house purchase had thrown a wrench in their plans. Benjamin, pointing at his mistress, admitted he still had debts from the money he had lavishly spent on her. It slowly dawned on me that Benjamin intended to sell the house to settle these debts and secure a new place for them both. The realization washed over me like a harsh wave. Benjamin knew full well that the house was a precious inheritance from my father, and yet he was willing to disregard Nancy and me in his scheme to seize my most valuable asset. My anger surged as I confronted him. Despite the tense situation, he continued to hurl insults, displaying a shocking lack of decency. I challenged his audacity to sell my house without my consent, emphasizing that I was the rightful owner. My anger grew as I questioned whether he had gone as far as forging documents to facilitate the sale. Subsequently, I disclosed an unexpected development. Benjamin had been disparaging the alleged purchasers of the house without realizing that they were his parents. Nancy had told my in-laws about Benjamin's wrongdoings, so she was the one who broke the news to them. My in-laws, furious at their son's behavior, had made the decision to intervene and defend their cherished granddaughter as well as their daughter-in-law. Nancy firmly went up to tell us that her grandparents were aware of the house's importance to us and were against its quick sale. They had cleverly feigned to be the first people to purchase the house. Desperate and defeated, Benjamin let out a foul laugh and yelled at Nancy and her grandparents upon discovering this falsehood. But Nancy did not lose her composure in the face of his verbal abuse. I responded by taking a piece of paper out of my backpack and shoving it under Benjamin's nose, prepared to present him with proof. The complicated dynamics of families and the extent people will go to in order to protect those they love were brought to light by the drama that was developing. I swung the divorce papers around and said with determination, "I want a divorce." Benjamin scoffed and snorted, not understanding the seriousness of the issue and making me wonder if I could survive without him. I was unmoved by his haughtiness and determined to refute his incorrect beliefs. I sat back and told Benjamin that I had a plan, determined to break through his delusions. "Never fear," I said, I'm going to receive a lifetime present from your parents," and revealed that his parents were stepping in to make sure Nancy and I would be taken care of, in spite of everything. This decision was about more than just dissolving a marriage. It was about ensuring Nancy and I would have a secure future. I recently announced that I had received a sizable pre-in. Benjamin and his mistress were clearly taken aback by the inheritance gift. I clarified that my in-laws made the decision to give me a portion of their money as soon as possible due to their health concerns. My in-laws made it apparent that they felt I deserved the generosity more, especially because I had given them a treasured granddaughter than Benjamin, who I had initially assumed may benefit from it. They were disappointed with Benjamin because, despite their having facilitated a life-saving organ donation, he had not shown gratitude. I accepted the present with gratitude, feeling lucky to have received such kindness. Benjamin was obviously distressed by this choice. He appeared pale and uneasy. He was fiercely against the agreement, calling it unethical and dishonest, and he even threatened to sue. But I calmly explained that our parents had made a completely logical decision and that his current predicament was the result of his financial irresponsibility. I also openly questioned if he could really afford the legal fees, given his track record of reckless spending. I confronted him more directly and told him that I was going to demand every penny because of child support and emotional pain. I told him quite bluntly that I would do whatever it took to make sure he did what he had to do. Benjamin apologized profusely, but it was obvious that it was too late. He was overcome with regret. I made it clear to him that I would not back down from getting even for the abuse and disregard he had given me and our daughter Nancy. A realtor who had witnessed the entire discussion thanked me for managing the unpleasant issue well as Benjamin and his mistress swiftly departed the area. Even though it was tense, the settlement was essential to maintaining accountability and respect within our family. Once any misconceptions had been resolved, I was prepared to welcome a fresh start. Nancy, my daughter, and I strolled home together while holding hands. Her smile gave me more courage as she thanked me for standing up for her. I silently vowed to keep her safe at all times. The divorce from Benjamin went through without any problems, ending a long-term unhappy marriage. It ended abruptly, which surprised me and made me consider why I had put up with so much for so long. It turned out that Benjamin had borrowed a lot of money to finance his extramarital activities and had wasted a sizable sum of money on his affair. Eventually, his mistress walked out on him, unable to handle his unstable finances. Meanwhile, Benjamin experienced hurdles in his career. Due to a lack of materials, his company had to make layoffs. One of the first people let go from the factory was Benjamin. Even though it was regrettable for him, it was likely that Benjamin was among the employees let go by the company due to subpar work or behavior, which may have included his behavior at home. Benjamin, who was now unemployed, made ends meet by doing part-time jobs and didn't take the initiative to look for a full-time job. Having lost his wife, career, and lover, his life seemed hopeless. Benjamin had taken my sacrifices for granted, even though I'd gone to the lengths of donating a kidney to him in the past. It appeared that he was finally being dealt with by karma, therefore he should concentrate on paying off his debts. Using the resources I acquired from my in-laws, I ventured into illustration in the interim, turning a new leaf. Initially motivated by Nancy's compliments on my drawing abilities, I got encouraging responses from customers who appreciated how careful and proficient my work was. I want to keep working hard to give Nancy and myself a better life, and I also want to grow my clientele. This new chapter was a proactive move toward a prosperous future, as well as a healing from previous traumas.